But now we ask you if you wish to pay your tribute to Terry Pratchett. The best-selling author has died, aged 66. And it followed a very high-profile fight with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. But since the release of his first novel, The Colour of Magic, in 1983, his book sold more than 75 million copies around the world. You or someone you know reads Sir Terry. He's one of Britain's most loved writers. His passing was announced in typical style via his Twitter account. First, with a tweet in the style of one of the characters from his books, Death. And this tweet read, "At last, Sir Terry, we must walk together." A second tweet read, "Terry took Death's arm and followed him through the doors and onto the black desert under the endless night." And the final tweet simply read, "The end." Terry Pratchett wasn't a fantasy author alone. That didn't define him. His friends and readers said he was a man of incredible intelligence. He was often called upon for commentary on theology, religion, humanity and life itself. And from his diagnosis with Alzheimer's in 2008, he worked tirelessly to raise money and awareness. And as you know, he also became a strong campaigner for the right to die legislation. Did he inspire you? Tell us what was magical about his writing. Summon up a character for us. Have you never read him? What is this the time you might start? 0500 288 291. Email Vine at bbc.co.uk. First, let's meet his illustrator, Paul Kidby. Hello, Paul.
Hello.
For a man who spent a lot of time talking, as he did, about death, the end, I think, must still have shocked you.
Yes, it did. I mean, we knew that Terry wasn't well, but it's still a shock when the news comes.
And how did you first meet him?
I met Terry in 1994, and I queued at a book signing in Smith's in Bath, and I had some photocopies of some of Terry's characters that I had drawn, and I thought I'd go to the book signing and give him the copies of my drawings. And I queued for 3 hours. And I wasn't prepared to queue for 3 hours. I didn't realise how popular he was back then. I mean, he's even more popular now. But 3 hours gave me the time for the penny to drop that he was very successful and had a huge following even then.
Paul, thank you. For now, we're going to try and plug our buttons differently and get you a better phone line, but we heard that you came with drawings as a reader, you queued for 3 hours, and Terry then made you his illustrator because he knew he loved your stuff and you could see his characters. We'll try and come back to you, Paul. Jason Anthony is editor of the Terry Pratchett newsletter, Discworld Monthly. Hello, Jason.
Good afternoon.
Paul said he was staggered by his popularity. Were you?
Yeah, well, I've known Terry for a long time. We first met him back in 1990, and he'd already written 15 books by then. So it's been a long time, and he has been very popular for a long time. But popular with fans, but not necessarily popular with the press or with the critics, I think.
That's interesting. So there was a sort of snobism. He was a fantasy writer, he wore a big hat, and he's not for us bookish people.
That's what it seemed to be. Whereas if you actually read his books, there's a lot more detail than that. He writes a lot more than just fantasy. He writes about police procedures. He writes murder mysteries. He writes all sorts of things. There's far, far more into it. Equal women's rights and all sorts of bits and pieces. There's far more in his stories than just fantasy.
It's interesting how we say just fantasy, that many people read fantasy, but also many of us read in genres, don't we? We feel as though we're not going to step comfortably into a new world. And we're going to ask you to do a job for us, which I'm sure you'll love doing, which is introducing him to new readers. There will be many listening who haven't picked him up. Back to Paul Kidby. Paul, we've mended your phone line. We've got jobs as telephone engineers now.
Thank you.
What we'd like you to do, you illustrate one of his characters. Illustrate one in our mind. Draw a character for us about why you loved drawing this person and what characteristics they had. One of Terry Pratchett's characters who fired your imagination.
OK, I'm going to go with Granny Weatherwax, who's one of my favourites. And she's an elderly lady. So like Jason was saying, lots of Terry's main characters were female, which for me is really good because it's lovely to do strong characters but aren't what you expect. So Granny Weatherwax is an elderly lady in her 80s, quite tall and thin, but she's very powerful. And that sort of comes across when I draw her in the way I sort of do her stance and her face, her eyes. It's all really in her expressions.
Okay, and Jason, you're listening. Tell us again the name of the character we're listening to now.
Granny Weatherwax.
Granny Weatherwax. And
yes.
what does she do in the novels? What kind of fun is had with Granny Weatherwax?
Well, she's a witch, but in the Discworld, witches aren't evil old crones. They're midwives. They're the people that sit up all night with the dead bodies and look after them until the next morning. They're the people that make the tough decision on the edges. So when it's time to let someone go, when it's time to help someone, to bring new life into the world, they are the wise people, the people that people go to when they don't have answers.
And is this sort of for children we know who liked Harry Potter? Is it appropriate for 15 downwards? Is it 10-year-old? Can 10-year-olds read it?
Terry's written a number of books for the younger audience, the younger adults. So there's a Tiffany Akening book which starts off with a young witch who's age 9. So that's a really good introduction for the younger readers. And then the main books, I've known readers as low as maybe 9 or 10, but it's probably teen onwards, I would think.
What did he think about his fans? I mean, obviously we heard he hired Paul as his illustrator. That's quite a risk, you'd think, if you just go to a book signing and say, oh, look, I've drawn one of your characters, and before you know where you are, you're drawing many in publishing.
Yeah, I think he loved his fans. He was a fan of his fans, if you like. He made friendships from his fans rather than just treat them as people that paid his books. He would come to events and he would give up a lot of his time, and outside of his requirements, his commitments in these times, he'd sit down and he'd come down to the bar at the end of the evening and sit and have drinks with his fans and spend time with them.
And what would your tribute to him be?
A very funny man that made us think.
Thank you both very much for now. We were listening there to Jason Anthony, editor of the Terry Pratchett newsletter, Discworld Monthly, and Paul Kidby. We'll take some music and then we'll talk about the work he did for Alzheimer's research and ask you as well, pay your own tribute.